In a society where justice is nothing more than a myth, we are left to seethe with outrage at the unyielding grip of corruption. For too long, powerful elites have manipulated our institutions, turning truth into a commodity and our pain into a mere inconvenience. The betrayal of those sworn to protect us is not just a failure, it's a crime that demands our fury. Today, we refuse to be silenced. We stand in defiance of a system that punishes the innocent and shields the guilty. It's time to ignite the flames of resistance and demand accountability. For our anger is the spark that will shatter this broken illusion of justice. What do you think? Are we finally ready to confront the corrupt and reclaim our future? In the heart of Silverbrook, a city once known for its vibrant industry and bustling streets, a pall of despair and corruption now hangs heavily over every corner. Once a beacon of progress and hope, Silverbrook has gradually succumbed to the decay of a system that was meant to protect its citizens. The sprawling urban landscape, dotted with remnants of a once prosperous industrial era, now echoes with whispers of betrayal and injustice. Under the surface of this fading metropolis, powerful forces conspire in secret, setting in motion a chain of events that will forever alter the fabric of the city. Silverbrook's rise and decline are a tale of ambition twisted by greed. Decades ago, the city thrived on its factories. Its promise of a better life was as tangible as the smoke rising from its chimneys. But as global shifts eroded local industries, the factories fell silent, and hope dimmed in the eyes of the working class. The neighborhoods that once pulsed with life became canvases for despair and neglect. It wasn't long before those in power saw an opportunity, a chance to reshape the system to serve their own interests, leaving ordinary citizens to bear the consequences. At the center of this web of deceit is a justice system long compromised by prejudice, power, and the lure of easy money. The halls of justice in Silverbrook, with their aged marble and echoing corridors, have become arenas for clandestine deals and backroom negotiations. High-ranking officers in the Silverbrook Police Department, once entrusted with upholding the law, have been seduced by the darkness of corruption. Among them, a secretive cabal led by Detective Marcus Reed and Sergeant Adrian Moore operates with a brazen disregard for truth and fairness. Their hearts, once pledged to the service of the community, have now been hard-set by a bitter mix of racial bias and personal ambition. Detective Reed, a man whose steely eyes conceal decades of disillusionment, has long harbored a deep-seated animosity towards those who dare challenge the status quo. His disdain is particularly directed at community activists and outspoken critics who, in his eyes, threaten the established order. Alongside him, Sergeant Moore, a figure both respected and feared, embodies the ruthless pragmatism of the corrupt system. Together, they have orchestrated a series of covert operations designed not to protect the public, but to fortify their own power. Their machinations are as subtle as they are sinister, slowly eroding the public's trust in a system that was once thought inviolable. In the midst of the storm of corruption and despair, Silverbrook citizens have begun to murmur about a new beacon of hope. A young, determined woman whose passion for justice is as fierce as the city's own history of struggle. Ava Monroe, a native of Silverbrook and a rising star in the local legal circles, has earned a reputation for her uncompromising stance against injustice. Raised amidst the hardships of a neglected neighborhood, Ava has seen firsthand the devastating effects of a system marred by prejudice and greed. Her journey through adversity has instilled in her a burning desire to right the wrongs that have plagued her beloved city for so long. Ava's story is intertwined with that of Silverbrook itself, a city that has become a battleground where every act of courage is met with fierce resistance from those entrenched in power. As whispers of her relentless campaigns against police misconduct spread through the community, Ava has inadvertently become a thorn in the side of Detective Reed and Sergeant Moore. To them, her very existence represents a threat, a challenge to the delicate equilibrium they have carefully constructed through manipulation and deceit. The roots of the corruption run deep. Within the labyrinthine corridors of Silverbrook's courts, Judge Philip Garner stands as a figure of quiet complicity. Once a man of principle, Garner now finds himself ensnared in a web of debts and moral compromise. His judgments, once fair and impartial, have been tainted by bribes and the silent threats of those who hold the real power in the city. It is said that the judges' chambers, lined with imposing shelves of legal tomes and family portraits, conceal the weight of secrets too heavy for any honest man to bear. Every decision he makes, every ruling that passes his lips, is a silent capitulation to the forces that govern Silverbrook behind closed doors. In this turbulent environment, the stage is set for a grand deception. The conspirators have already begun to weave a narrative, a tale of deceit that will soon be used to undermine not only Ava Monroe's reputation but the very idea of justice in Silverbrook. Their plan is meticulous, crafted with the precision of a master schemer who knows that even the smallest detail can topple a life built on integrity. Every document forged, every whispered phone call, every secret meeting in the dim backrooms of Silverbrook's forgotten establishments is part of a larger design to corrupt the very soul of the city. Yet, beneath the surface of calculated treachery, there is an undeniable current of emotion, a raw, visceral energy that pulses through the streets of Silverbrook. The people, battered by years of neglect and systemic injustice, are not so easily subdued. Their hearts, though scarred by the weight of their experiences, beat with a stubborn hope that one day, truth and righteousness will prevail. In the quiet corners of community centers, in the fervent prayers whispered in places of worship, and in the resolute expressions of everyday citizens, there lies a collective promise that no matter how deep the darkness, the light of justice will one day pierce through. As the city braces itself for the impending storm, Silverbrook becomes more than just a backdrop for corruption. It transforms into a living, breathing character in its own right. Its weathered streets, once paved with dreams of prosperity, now bear the scars of a relentless battle between the forces of good and evil. Every alleyway, every abandoned storefront, whispers a story of lost promises and the enduring spirit of those who refuse to be silenced. The convergence of these elements, corruption, hope, and the relentless pursuit of justice, sets the tone for the epic struggle that is about to unfold. The conspiracies of Detective Reed, Sergeant Moore, and Judge Garner are not merely acts of individual malice. They are symptomatic of a system that has long been broken. And at the heart of this struggle stands Ava Monroe, a symbol of defiance against the tide of injustice that threatens to drown Silverbrook in despair. In this first chapter of a long and arduous journey, the city of Silverbrook and its inhabitants are on the cusp of a transformation. The seeds of resistance, sown by the quiet determination of a few brave souls, are beginning to sprout amidst the ruins of corruption. As the machinations of the corrupt grow ever more elaborate, one can only wonder how the scales of justice will ultimately be balanced. Will the silent voices of the oppressed rise to challenge the might of those who seek to control them? Or will the shadow of corruption prove too vast to overcome? At this very moment, in the echoing silence of a dimly lit office or the fervent whispers in a community hall, the stage is set for an epic confrontation. The fate of Silverbrook hangs in the balance, poised between the decay of a corrupt system and the promise of a rebirth led by those unafraid to stand up for what is right. What do you think will happen next in Silverbrook? Share your thoughts below. As Silverbrook's early morning light struggled to pierce the lingering shadows of a restless night, the city awoke to whispers of an unfolding conspiracy. The delicate balance between hope and despair, so vividly painted in the first chapter, was now being threatened by the sinister machinations of those determined to silence dissent and maintain their grip on power. In a hidden corner of Silverbrook, far from the prying eyes of the public, Detective Marcus Reed and Sergeant Adrian Moore convened in a nondescript warehouse. The space, filled with the hum of old machinery and the musty scent of abandoned dreams, served as the perfect backdrop for their clandestine meeting. Reed, his face etched with lines that spoke of countless betrayals, paced back and forth as he mulled over the latest development in their carefully orchestrated plan. His eyes, cold and calculating, flicked over the scattered documents on a battered table, blueprints of corruption that charted every illicit transaction and every covert meeting that had brought them this far. Moore, seated in a dilapidated metal chair, regarded his partner with a mixture of admiration and contempt. Though they shared a common purpose, to subvert the very ideals of justice that the citizens of Silverbrook believed in, there was an undercurrent of rivalry between them. The tension in the room was palpable. Moore's voice, low and measured, finally broke the silence. We must act quickly, Marcus. Ava Monroe's rising influence is becoming a serious threat. Her activism is rallying the people and exposing our weaknesses. His words carried a heavy dose of urgency, as if each syllable were a harbinger of the chaos that would soon be unleashed. Reed's lips curled into a sardonic smile. Ava Monroe? She's just one voice in the chorus of dissent. But yes, if her light grows too bright, we risk losing the control we've so painstakingly established. We need a new strategy, one that will discredit her without arousing suspicion. As the two men hashed out their dark plans, little did they know that the very same walls that sheltered their secrets had begun to whisper among those who dared to listen. Across town, in a modest but warmly lit community center, Ava Monroe was meeting with a small group of trusted allies. The room buzzed with a palpable sense of purpose as activists, legal experts, and community leaders gathered to discuss strategies for challenging the systemic corruption that had plagued Silverbrook for decades. Ava, standing before them with an air of resolute determination, recounted the grim realities faced by the city's most vulnerable citizens. Her voice, both passionate and measured, carried the weight of personal loss and the fire of a dream for a more just society. Every day, we witness the scars of injustice, families torn apart, lives ruined by lies, and a city held hostage by those who exploit our pain for their own gain, she declared, her eyes scanning the room, igniting a spark of hope in the hearts of those present. But we are not powerless. Our strength lies in our unity, our refusal to be silenced. Today, we begin the fight to reclaim our city and restore the faith that has been so callously shattered. Among the attendees was Reverend Elijah Carter, a well-respected figure in Silverbrook's spiritual community. His deep, resonant voice joined Ava's call for change, urging the congregation to stand firm in the face of corruption. Let us be the light in the darkness, the beacon that guides our community towards a future where justice prevails, he proclaimed, his words echoing in the hallowed hall. The meeting ended with a chorus of determined nods and solemn vows to expose the insidious network of deceit that had ensnared their beloved city. Back in the underbelly of Silverbrook, Reed and Moore were not idle. Their plan to undermine Ava was multi-pronged and ruthless. Their first target was to fabricate evidence that would not only tarnish Ava's reputation but also cast doubt on her every achievement. They devised a scheme to plant manipulated documents and false testimonies that would paint her as a mastermind behind a sprawling criminal enterprise. A narrative designed to shock the public and discredit her once and for all. Their operation was meticulous. Late one stormy night, under the cover of darkness, Reed and Moore, accompanied by a group of unwilling accomplices from the criminal underworld, broke into Ava's modest apartment. The sound of their hurried footsteps and the muffled whispers of their treacherous plot reverberated against the cold walls of the building. With practiced efficiency, they planted forged ledgers and fake digital communications on her laptop, fabrications that would, in time, be manipulated to serve their malevolent agenda. Outside, as the rain battered the narrow alleys of Silverbrook, an anonymous tip began to circulate among the local media. A mysterious figure, hidden behind layers of encryption and careful anonymity, leaked snippets of information hinting at Ava's supposed involvement in criminal activities. News outlets, hungry for sensational stories, latched onto these fragments without the rigor of thorough investigation. Headlines flashed across television screens and digital billboards, local activists linked to criminal syndicate, and Ava Monroe, hero or villain. The public, already divided by a legacy of mistrust, was thrown into a maelstrom of uncertainty. The ripple effect was immediate. Supporters of Ava, who had once felt invincible in their belief in justice, now found themselves questioning the narratives fed to them by the media. Doubt began to creep into the hearts of even her staunchest allies. Yet, in the midst of the growing confusion, Ava remained unwavering. With each new allegation, she doubled down on her resolve to prove her innocence and expose the corrupt forces at work. Ava's legal team, led by the sharp-minded attorney James Ellison, convened in a quiet conference room above a bustling cafe. Papers were strewn across the table, and the air was thick with a mix of anxiety and determination. "We have to act fast," James urged, his voice trembling slightly with the pressure of the mounting evidence against them. "If we don't counter these fabrications with undeniable proof, we risk losing everything Ava has fought for." His colleagues exchanged worried glances, acutely aware that every minute lost could further entrench the deceit that threatened to topple their cause. As the legal experts pored over the details of the planted evidence, another player entered the fray, a seasoned investigative journalist named Rebecca Sinclair. With a reputation for fearless reporting and an unyielding commitment to the truth, Rebecca had long suspected that something was amiss beneath Silverbrook's polished veneer. Drawn by rumors and whispered confessions from sources within the police department, she began to piece together the puzzle of corruption that spanned the city. Late nights spent sifting through public records, covert interviews in dimly lit cafes, and clandestine meetings in shadowy parking lots gradually revealed a tapestry of deceit that implicated high-ranking officials in the very fabric of Silverbrook's downfall. Rebecca's investigation not only unearthed the shady deals orchestrated by Reed and Moore, but also hinted at the involvement of Judge Philip Garner, a once-respected magistrate whose fall from grace had been as gradual as it was devastating. The journalist's notes painted a picture of a man caught in a web of debts and moral decay, his once sterling reputation tarnished by the allure of quick money and quiet compromises. As her findings began to form a damning narrative, Rebecca knew that publishing her story would be a pivotal moment in the battle for Silverbrook's soul. However, she also understood the risks. The powerful forces that now reigned in the city would stop at nothing to silence the truth. The tension in Silverbrook reached a fever pitch as the various strands of this dangerous game converged. On one side, the corrupt officials and their cohorts were ready to unleash a campaign of character assassination and legal manipulation designed to crush Ava Monroe's growing influence. On the other, a coalition of community leaders, activists, and truth-seekers, emboldened by the unwavering determination of their heroine, prepared to expose the systemic rot that had long festered in the heart of their city. In the coming days, the battle lines would be drawn not just in courtrooms and clandestine meetings, but also in the hearts and minds of Silverbrook's citizens. The clash of narratives, one of fabricated villainy and one of relentless hope, was set to define the future of the city. As the storm of corruption began to swirl more violently, every resident, from the most downtrodden worker to the influential community leader, sensed that they were on the brink of an irreversible turning point. Amidst this brewing chaos, Ava Monroe's personal struggles became a microcosm of Silverbrook's collective fight for justice. Late at night, as she sat alone in the modest confines of her apartment, the weight of the accusations bore down on her like a suffocating shroud. Yet even in those solitary moments of doubt and fear, she found strength in the quiet voices of her ancestors and in the unwavering support of those who believed in her cause. Each heartbeat was a reminder that the battle for truth was not one fought alone, but by a community united in its desire for change. The narrative of betrayal, manipulation, and the fierce pursuit of justice was unfolding like an intricate tapestry, each thread interwoven with the lives of those who dared to challenge the established order. As Silverbrook teetered on the edge of a monumental shift, the question loomed large. Would the darkness that had shrouded the city for so long be banished by the light of truth and collective resolve, or would the forces of corruption prove too entrenched to overcome? In this critical juncture, every secret meeting, every whispered conversation in the back alleys, and every determined protest signified not just a personal battle for Ava Monroe, but a larger war for the soul of Silverbrook. The city was awakening to the reality that change was not only necessary, it was inevitable. And as the web of deceit began to unravel, the hope that had long been buried beneath layers of corruption started to emerge, fragile yet defiant, like a new dawn breaking over a darkened horizon. What are your thoughts on the unfolding conspiracy? How far do you think corruption can go before the truth prevails? The day of reckoning dawned over Silverbrook with an air of solemn inevitability. The once-forgotten courthouse, its facade bearing the scars of years of corruption and neglect, now stood as the battleground where the forces of truth and deception would clash. In the days leading up to the trial, the city had been gripped by a mixture of anticipation, fear, and hope. Rumors swirled like autumn leaves in the wind, whispers of damning evidence, the courage of unexpected witnesses, and the possibility that the dark web of deceit might finally unravel. Inside the courthouse's marble halls, a palpable tension hung in the air. Ava Monroe, dressed in a conservative yet dignified blue blazer and skirt, entered the building with measured steps. Her face, etched with both determination and fatigue, bore the marks of a long fight for justice. Despite the relentless onslaught of fabricated allegations and manipulated evidence, her eyes shone with a fierce resolve, a silent promise that she would not be crushed by the weight of corruption. Ava's legal team gathered in a cramped conference room moments before the trial was set to begin. Attorney James Ellison, whose steady gaze had become a source of strength for the team, reviewed the final details of their defense strategy. His voice, soft yet unwavering, reminded everyone, "Today, every fact, every testimony matters. We must show the court, and the people of Silverbrook, that what has been presented is nothing more than a web of lies." His words were met with quiet nods and determined expressions from his colleagues, each acutely aware that the stakes could not be higher. In stark contrast, the prosecution's side appeared equally resolute, albeit driven by a more sinister purpose. Detective Marcus Reed and Sergeant Adrian Moore, seated in the gallery with their eyes fixed on Ava, exuded an air of practiced confidence. Their expressions, however, betrayed flickers of anxiety, whispers of uncertainty that perhaps the carefully laid plan was beginning to show cracks. The trial commenced with a hushed courtroom as Judge Philip Garner, his face pallid and his eyes shadowed with internal conflict, took his seat on the bench. The proceedings began with the opening statements, and as the deputy district attorney outlined the fabricated narrative, the room was filled with an undercurrent of disbelief. The prosecution painted a picture of a cunning mastermind behind a sprawling criminal enterprise, a narrative that, on the surface, appeared damning. But beneath the veneer of conviction, every word felt rehearsed, lacking the authenticity that comes with genuine evidence. As the opening arguments concluded, the courtroom transformed into a theater of clashing ideologies. Ava's supporters sat in rapt silence, their faces lit by a shared hope that justice would prevail, while members of the community who had been swayed by the sensational headlines listened with guarded skepticism. In the gallery, the tension was almost tangible, each spectator a silent participant in a drama that had come to define the soul of Silverbrook. The prosecution called its first witnesses, officers involved in the now discredited raid on Ava's apartment. One by one, they recounted the events of that fateful night, their testimonies carefully orchestrated to support the narrative of a dangerous criminal network. Yet, as each officer took the stand, Ava's legal team meticulously cross-examined them, exposing minute discrepancies in their timelines and inconsistencies in the chain of custody for the planted evidence. James Ellison's pointed questions forced one officer after another into uneasy silence, as the cracks in the prosecution's case began to widen. A hush fell over the courtroom when, unexpectedly, the defense announced their intention to call a surprise witness, a young patrol officer named Lila Ramirez. Lila, known among a small circle of honest officers for her quiet integrity, had witnessed discrepancies in the police reports and had secretly preserved copies of internal documents that hinted at evidence tampering. As she stepped forward, her hands trembled slightly, betraying the weight of the secret she was about to reveal. Yet her voice, when she spoke, was clear and resolute. While on duty that night, I noticed that the official timeline provided by our department did not match the actual dispatch records. Lila testified, her eyes never wavering from the judge's gaze. I saw alterations in the evidence logs that no honest officer would ever make. I believe the evidence was manipulated to frame Ms. Monroe. Her testimony sent ripples through the courtroom. For the first time, the audience witnessed a direct challenge to the integrity of the officers who had, until now, been the architects of the fabricated narrative. The prosecution's lead officer faltered under the cross-examination, struggling to account for the discrepancies Lila had so confidently exposed. Murmurs of disbelief spread among the spectators, and even a few hardened faces began to soften as doubt seeped into the once unquestioning belief in the official story. Outside the courtroom, the atmosphere in Silverbrook was electric. Groups of citizens had gathered, holding signs demanding transparency and justice. Social media buzzed with real-time updates as news outlets scrambled to cover the trial's dramatic turn. Among the crowd, voices of dissent and hope merged into a unified call for accountability, each individual a testament to the power of collective resistance against corruption. Back inside, the trial took a dramatic turn when defense attorney Rebecca Sinclair, the investigative journalist whose relentless pursuit of the truth had first uncovered hints of the conspiracy, presented a series of documents and recordings. These pieces of evidence, obtained through months of clandestine work, detailed communications between Detective Reed, Sergeant Moore, and even hinted at clandestine meetings with Judge Garner. The documents were meticulously annotated, each line a dagger aimed at the very heart of the corrupt establishment. Judge Garner, attempting to maintain control over the proceedings, repeatedly admonished the defense for introducing hearsay and speculative materials. Yet even as he dismissed certain pieces of evidence, the weight of the revelations was undeniable. Each document chipped away at the carefully constructed facade of the prosecution's case, laying bare the systematic manipulation that had been orchestrated behind closed doors. The turning point came when Ava's own testimony was called. Despite the gravity of the charges against her, Ava walked to the stand with a calm demeanor that belied the turbulent storm of emotions churning within her. She spoke not with the quiver of a victim, but with the steady conviction of a woman who had seen too much injustice to ever bow down again. "I stand before you today not as a criminal, but as a defender of justice," Ava declared, her voice resonating throughout the courtroom. "Every accusation laid against me is a lie, an attempt to silence my voice and to bury the truth about the corruption that has poisoned our city." Her words struck a chord in the hearts of those present. For many, they were the embodiment of the resilience and defiance that had defined Silverbrook's struggle for decades. As Ava recounted her journey, from the days of being a tireless community advocate to the moment she was ambushed by a corrupt system, tears welled in the eyes of her supporters. Yet there was also an unmistakable undercurrent of determination, a promise that no matter how dark the night, the dawn would eventually break. In the ensuing hours, the courtroom became a cauldron of conflicting emotions. The prosecution's carefully rehearsed narrative began to crumble under the weight of the mounting evidence and the relentless scrutiny of Ava's defense team. Witnesses wavered, and even the judge's attempts to steer the proceedings back on course were met with a growing chorus of dissent from the public gallery. It was as if the very walls of the courthouse were echoing the voices of Silverbrook's downtrodden citizens, voices that had long been suppressed, now rising in unison to demand a reckoning. As the trial neared its climax, the defense rested its case on one final piece of incontrovertible evidence: a forensic report from an independent lab that conclusively proved the substance seized from Ava's apartment was nothing more than inert baking soda, not cocaine as had been falsely alleged. The revelation sent shockwaves through the courtroom. The prosecution's narrative, already riddled with inconsistencies, now faced a blow that threatened to dismantle it entirely. Judge Garner's face turned ashen as he struggled to reconcile the incontrovertible facts with the carefully curated story that had been presented in his courtroom. For a brief moment, silence reigned. A silence so profound it was as if time itself had paused, allowing the truth to seep in. Then, in a moment of poetic justice, the jury returned with a verdict that reverberated through every corner of Silverbrook. Ava Monroe was declared not guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted into a tumult of emotions: cheers, relieved sighs, and a collective outcry against the dark forces that had tried so desperately to silence a beacon of hope. As Ava stood there, tears streaming down her cheeks, her expression was a blend of relief and fierce determination. She knew that while this trial marked a monumental victory, it was only the beginning of a long and arduous journey to cleanse Silverbrook of the corruption that had festered for so long. Outside, the city's reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Crowds poured into the streets, celebrating the triumph of truth over treachery. Banners waved, and chants of justice for Silverbrook filled the air. Amidst the jubilation, there was also a cautious optimism, a recognition that while the battle for a truly just society was far from over, the winds of change had undeniably begun to blow. In that moment, Silverbrook transformed. The courthouse, once a symbol of manipulated power, had become a crucible for change. Ava Monroe's victory was more than a personal triumph. It was a rallying cry for every citizen who had ever felt betrayed by a system that promised justice but delivered only despair. It was a vivid reminder that even in the darkest corridors of power, the light of truth could shine through, illuminating a path toward redemption and reform. As the crowd celebrated and the echoes of justice reverberated through the city, many could not help but wonder, could this be the turning point that would finally end decades of corruption in Silverbrook? Would the fallen architects of deceit be held accountable? And could the city rise again from the ashes of its troubled past? In the wake of the trial's historic verdict, Silverbrook found itself standing at the crossroads of transformation. The reverberations of Ava Monroe's victory continued to echo in every street, every conversation, and every heart that had long yearned for justice. The long night of deceit and corruption had finally given way to a tentative sunrise, a moment pregnant with both hope and the daunting responsibility of rebuilding. The city awakens. The once dreary streets of Silverbrook began to stir with an energy that had been absent for decades. In neighborhoods where despair had reigned, new discussions of change emerged. Community centers and local cafes, once the silent witnesses to sorrow, now buzzed with animated debates about reform. Citizens, emboldened by the trial's outcome, took to the streets with a renewed sense of purpose. Banners and street art emerged overnight, bearing messages like "Justice Restored" and "Reform for Silverbrook," each stroke of paint a defiant rejection of the old order. Ava Monroe, now seen not only as a victim of injustice but as a catalyst for change, assumed a central role in this burgeoning movement. Recognizing that a single victory in the courtroom could only serve as the first step, she rallied community leaders, activists, and even some reformed members of the police force to join her in a mission to restore integrity to the very institutions that had once betrayed them. With her gentle yet determined guidance, plans were drawn up to establish a Citizens Oversight Committee, an independent body tasked with monitoring police activities and ensuring transparency within the justice system. Reforming the system. The shock of the trial's outcome forced a reckoning within the higher echelons of Silverbrook's administration. City officials, many of whom had long turned a blind eye to the undercurrents of corruption, now found themselves under intense public scrutiny. Emergency sessions were convened by the city council to address demands for reform. Among the most pressing issues was the restructuring of the police department, a once impregnable bastion of corruption that had allowed figures like Detective Marcus Reed and Sergeant Adrian Moore to thrive. Ava's legal allies and reform advocates, led by the sharp and principled James Ellison, began drafting proposals to overhaul internal protocols and introduce mandatory anti-corruption training. Independent auditors were called in to review decades of questionable practices, and long-ignored community grievances were finally given a voice. Even Judge Philip Garner's controversial decisions came under the microscope, as legal experts and civic watchdogs examined the layers of complicity that had allowed corruption to fester unchecked. The transformation, however, was not without resistance. Loyalists of the old guard, still clinging to power and the lucrative networks they had built, staged quiet protests and attempted to delay the reforms. Yet, for every act of resistance, there emerged a counterforce. Ordinary citizens, whistleblowers, and even a few courageous officers who risked their careers to come forward with the truth. Their collective actions forged a path toward accountability, slowly dismantling the web of deceit that had long strangled the city's promise. Personal journeys of healing and redemption. Amid the public uproar and the scramble for institutional reform, personal stories of healing and redemption began to surface. Many citizens, once embittered by a system that had repeatedly failed them, started sharing narratives of survival and hope. Community meetings turned into safe havens where long-suppressed stories were finally voiced. These gatherings served not only as platforms for airing grievances but also as incubators for new ideas. Ideas that envisioned a Silverbrook where justice was a living, breathing reality rather than an abstract promise. Ava Monroe herself became a symbol of resilience. In interviews with local media, she spoke candidly about the trauma she had endured, the sacrifices made along the way, and the enduring strength she discovered within herself. "I never believed that one person could make a difference," she confessed, her voice trembling with both emotion and conviction. "But when you stand up for what is right, even in the face of overwhelming darkness, you ignite a spark in others. Together, that spark can become an unquenchable flame of change." Her words resonated deeply with the people of Silverbrook. In turn, individuals who had once felt powerless found themselves stepping forward, sharing their own experiences and committing to the cause of rebuilding their community. Former police officers who had been complicit in past misdeeds now sought redemption by joining the Oversight Committee, their insider perspectives invaluable in designing safeguards against future corruption. Rebirth through art and culture. The transformation of Silverbrook was not solely a political or legal process. It was also cultural. In the months following the trial, local artists, musicians, and writers found themselves at the forefront of a cultural renaissance. Public murals sprang up in forgotten alleys, each one telling the story of a city reborn from the ashes of its troubled past. Poets recited verses that celebrated the triumph of truth over deception, and song lyrics echoed through community festivals, each performance a tribute to the enduring spirit of those who had fought for justice. These cultural expressions became the soul of the new Silverbrook, a city that recognized its scars, but also embraced the possibility of healing. Community theaters revived old plays and commissioned new works, all centered on themes of resilience, unity, and hope. The arts became a medium through which the collective memory of the past was both mourned and transformed, allowing the city to move forward with a sense of shared purpose. Challenges on the horizon. Despite the palpable optimism, the path to true reform was fraught with challenges. The entrenched networks of power, while weakened, were not yet entirely dismantled. Economic disparities, lingering racial tensions, and the scars of decades-long injustice still cast long shadows over Silverbrook. For every new policy enacted, there was a counterforce determined to undermine it, a reminder that the battle for justice is never truly won in a single stroke. In council meetings, heated debates raged over the allocation of funds for community programs, the extent of police reform, and the implementation of new accountability measures. Some residents remained skeptical, their trust in the system so deeply eroded by past betrayals that the prospect of change seemed almost too good to be true. Yet, even amid such skepticism, there was an undercurrent of cautious optimism, a belief that with persistent effort and unwavering commitment, the city could finally rise above its troubled legacy. Ava, standing at the helm of this transformative tide, knew that the work was only just beginning. Each day presented new hurdles, each policy change met with both fervent support and staunch opposition. But she also understood that the true measure of progress lay not in the ease with which challenges were overcome, but in the courage to persist in the face of adversity. Every setback, every moment of doubt, was an opportunity to reaffirm the commitment to a better Silverbrook, a city where justice was not a privilege reserved for the powerful, but a right guaranteed to every citizen. The road ahead. As Silverbrook moved forward into this new era, the legacy of its past served as both a cautionary tale and a source of inspiration. The collective struggle against corruption had taught the community that change was possible, but only through relentless vigilance and an unyielding belief in the power of truth. New initiatives were launched to promote transparency and civic engagement, ensuring that the voices of the people would continue to guide the city's future. Ava's own journey was evolving too. No longer defined solely by her role as a victim or a fighter in the courtroom, she was emerging as a leader, a beacon of hope for a city determined to reclaim its identity. With every reform enacted, every public forum held, and every life touched by the winds of change, Silverbrook was slowly but surely charting a new course. The trials of the past had forged a resilient spirit in its people, one that refused to be extinguished by the forces of greed and injustice. In this period of rebirth, the people of Silverbrook found themselves united by a common vision, a future where the mistakes of the past would serve as the foundation for a society built on fairness, accountability, and compassion. The promise of a new dawn was more than a distant dream. It was a tangible goal, pursued relentlessly by every individual who had ever dared to believe that change was possible. Reflecting on the journey, The transformation of Silverbrook was a testament to the indomitable will of its citizens. It was a story of healing, a narrative where every broken piece of a shattered past was being meticulously pieced back together by the hands of those who refused to let despair define them. The echoes of the trial still reverberated, a constant reminder that even in the darkest hours, the human spirit can rise to meet the challenge of injustice. As night gave way to day, and as old wounds began to mend, Silverbrook stood as a symbol of resilience and renewal. A city that had learned that true change is born not from the actions of a few, but from the united efforts of an entire community. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but the spark of hope that had been ignited was a beacon that would guide them through the darkness. In the months following Silverbrook's initial surge toward reform, the city found itself navigating a maze of uncharted paths, roads that were as promising as they were perilous. The jubilant echoes of victory had, for a time, drowned out the murmurs of discontent. Yet beneath the surface of this newfound optimism, fissures began to appear that threatened to derail the transformative momentum. The cracks in the foundation, with the establishment of the Citizens Oversight Committee and the introduction of sweeping reforms in the police department, many believed that the dark days of corruption were behind Silverbrook. However, as the wheels of reform began to turn, the deep-seated structures of power proved resistant to rapid change. Former allies of the old regime, whose networks had once been impermeable, were not going to relinquish their hold on the city without a fight. Whispers of sabotage, clandestine meetings in shadowy corners, and the sudden disappearance of key records signaled that the struggle was far from over. In the corridors of the newly reformed administration, tension simmered among the reformers themselves. Even those with the best intentions found that change required not only dismantling the old but also building something entirely new, a task that often exposed the stark reality of conflicting interests. James Ellison, whose legal acumen had been instrumental in crafting the reform proposals, now faced the challenge of mediating between idealistic community leaders and pragmatic city officials wary of the economic repercussions of drastic overhauls. His office became a microcosm of the broader debate. How could Silverbrook ensure transparency and accountability without destabilizing the very framework that kept the city running? Internal battles and lingering doubts. Ava Monroe, hailed as the champion of justice, found herself increasingly burdened by the complexities of leadership. The very qualities that had once made her a symbol of hope, her fierce determination and unwavering moral compass, now clashed with the harsh realities of governance. Reports of retribution against whistleblowers began to surface, and old habits of covert retaliation from those who had once wielded unchecked power threatened to resurface. In quiet moments, Ava wrestled with the enormity of the task before her. Every decision, every policy change, carried the weight of countless lives and the lingering scars of past betrayals. Yet even as doubts crept in, Ava's resolve remained unbroken. Late one rainy evening, she stood before a modest gathering in a community hall, a space that had long been a sanctuary for the voices of the marginalized, and shared her vision for Silverbrook's future. Her speech, imbued with both sorrow for what had been lost and hope for what could be regained, resonated deeply with those in attendance. "We are not defined by the darkness that once enveloped our city," she declared, her voice steady despite the tremor of emotion. "We are defined by our willingness to walk through it, to learn from it, and to rise above it. Change is a journey with uncertain paths, but together, we will forge a way forward." Her words, though inspiring, also underscored a hard truth. The path to genuine reform would be long and fraught with setbacks. Even as new policies were implemented and oversight committees became active, remnants of the old regime lurked in the shadows. Dissenters within the police force, emboldened by the fear of losing their privileged positions, quietly resisted the new measures. Rumors of secret alliances, hidden financial incentives, and covert operations to undermine the oversight efforts began to circulate, casting a pall of uncertainty over the reforms. The struggle for true accountability. In the midst of this internal tug-of-war, investigative journalist Rebecca Sinclair continued her relentless pursuit of truth. Her probing articles, now a fixture in local newspapers and online forums, began to expose not only the misdeeds of former corrupt officials, but also the new challenges faced by the reform movement. Rebecca's latest exposé detailed instances where reform policies were being selectively enforced, a damning reminder that true accountability was still a work in progress. Her writing struck a chord among the citizens of Silverbrook, many of whom had grown weary of broken promises and half-measures. One particularly chilling account involved a series of audits that revealed discrepancies in the newly established Oversight Committee's budget. The funds earmarked for community outreach and police training had mysteriously dwindled, with opaque explanations that hinted at further misappropriation. The exposé ignited a fresh wave of protests. At city council meetings, citizens demanded transparency, and heated debates erupted over the distribution of resources meant to rebuild trust. The chorus of demands for accountability grew louder, echoing through the very halls that had once been the stage for unchecked corruption. The human cost of transformation. Amid these political and administrative battles, the everyday lives of Silverbrook's residents continued to be impacted by the city's turbulent transformation. In neighborhoods that had once been steeped in despair, small glimmers of hope emerged as local initiatives sprang up to address long-standing issues. Community gardens were established in vacant lots, providing not only fresh produce but also a sense of communal purpose. Local schools partnered with civic groups to educate youth on the importance of integrity and civic engagement. Yet, for many, the scars of past injustices remained a constant reminder of the fragile nature of progress. Elderly residents, who had witnessed decades of hardship, spoke of times when corruption seemed invincible, when voices like Ava Monroe's were nothing more than distant dreams. Their stories, recounted in whispered tones at neighborhood gatherings, served as both warnings and lessons, a call to remain vigilant even in times of apparent victory. "We must never forget," one such resident lamented, "that the fight for justice is never truly over. It is a flame that must be continually rekindled, or else it will be extinguished by the winds of greed and indifference." Emerging new leaders. As the battle for Silverbrook's soul raged on, new figures began to emerge from within the community. Among them was Darius Caldwell, a young community organizer with a talent for uniting disparate groups through his impassioned speeches and unwavering optimism. Darius, who had grown up in one of the city's hardest-hit neighborhoods, quickly became a beacon of hope for many who believed that the reform movement needed fresh perspectives. His initiatives focused on building grassroots networks that could hold local government accountable, ensuring that the voices of the marginalized were heard loud and clear. Working closely with Ava and the Citizens Oversight Committee, Darius spearheaded programs that aimed to bridge the gap between law enforcement and the community. Through town hall meetings, cultural festivals, and interactive workshops, he sought to rebuild trust and create a platform for dialogue. His efforts were not without challenges. Old habits and deep-seated suspicions did not vanish overnight, but with each small victory, he laid another brick in the foundation of a reformed Silverbrook. The uncertain road ahead. As Silverbrook continued its journey through these uncharted paths, the future remained a canvas of uncertainty. The city was at a critical juncture where every decision, every act of defiance or compliance, could tilt the balance toward lasting reform or a relapse into old, corrupt ways. The struggle for accountability was a constant battle, a reminder that the forces of greed and corruption never truly disappear. They only evolve and adapt to new circumstances. For Ava Monroe and her allies, the challenge was to stay vigilant in the face of inevitable setbacks. The passion that had driven the initial surge of change now had to be tempered with the pragmatism required to build lasting institutions. The community, too, was learning that the journey toward justice was not a straight line, but a winding road filled with unexpected twists and turns. It demanded resilience, adaptability, and, above all, a commitment to the belief that even in the most uncertain times, collective action could spark a revolution of hope. Reflections in the twilight. On a cool autumn evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Ava Monroe stood on a modest balcony overlooking the city she loved. In the distance, the sounds of the ongoing protests and community meetings mingled with the quiet hum of a city in transformation. In that reflective moment, she allowed herself a brief pause, a silent acknowledgement of both the triumphs and the trials that lay behind and ahead. Her eyes, reflecting the glow of the setting sun, carried the weight of her experiences. The pain of betrayal, the sting of injustice, and the fierce determination to never let the flame of hope die out. "This is only the beginning," she whispered to herself, a mantra for the long road that awaited. "We have come so far, but the journey is far from over. We must continue to walk this path together, for it is in unity that we will find the strength to overcome every obstacle." What uncertainties lie ahead? The transformation of Silverbrook was a testament to the enduring spirit of its people, a constant reminder that progress was a living, breathing process. As the winds of change stirred the city, questions remained. Could the reforms be solidified in the face of persistent resistance? Would the emerging leaders be able to navigate the murky waters of old loyalties and new ambitions? And most importantly, how would the everyday citizens of Silverbrook continue to find hope amid the challenges that lay ahead? As summer slowly yielded to the crisp promise of autumn, Silverbrook found itself on the precipice of a momentous shift, one that many believed would either cement its path toward lasting reform or plunge the city back into the darkness of its past. The air carried a charged tension, as if every whisper in the wind foretold that the scales of justice were about to tip irrevocably. The growing divide. In the weeks following the protests and the initial reform measures, the city's pulse began to quicken with a mixture of hope and apprehension. On one side of the divide were the ardent supporters of change, community organizers, honest officers, and everyday citizens who had long suffered under corruption. On the other side, remnants of the old regime, desperate to cling to their power, mobilized in secret, their strategies as elusive as shadows. Ava Monroe, now a recognized leader in Silverbrook's reform movement, found herself caught between these opposing forces. Daily, she navigated a maze of public meetings, heated council sessions, and one-on-one conversations with community members. Her once solitary struggle had transformed into a shared journey, yet the pressure of ensuring that reform was not just temporary, but deeply rooted in every institution weighed heavily on her shoulders. One evening, as Ava prepared for another long night of community forums at the newly established Civic Renewal Center, she paused to reflect on how far they had come. The center, a renovated building that had once been a symbol of bureaucratic neglect, now pulsed with life. Here, citizens debated policy, shared stories of injustice, and forged plans for a future built on transparency. Yet, even within these walls, the specter of sabotage loomed. Rumors of tampered records, intimidation of whistleblowers, and even violent reprisals had begun to surface. The tipping point, it seemed, was approaching. Internal struggles and external pressures. James Ellison, the tireless attorney who had once been the architect of Silverbrook's reform blueprint, now found himself in the midst of internal strife. In a recent strategy session, he confronted a group of newly elected council members who were increasingly divided on the pace and nature of change. "We cannot allow half measures to undermine the progress we've fought so hard to achieve," he argued, his tone both passionate and exasperated. "If we don't insist on full transparency and accountability, the old guard will simply find new ways to manipulate the system." Across town, Darius Caldwell, the dynamic community organizer whose grassroots initiatives had rekindled hope in many neighborhoods, faced his own challenges. His efforts to unite diverse groups were met with resistance not only from entrenched interests but also from within his own ranks. Some members, worn down by years of disappointment, began to question whether sustained change was truly possible. In a particularly poignant moment during a late-night meeting in a repurposed warehouse, Darius confided to a small circle of fellow organizers, "Every step forward is met with a pushback. We're at a tipping point where our commitment will either fortify our progress or shatter it completely. An unseen enemy emerges." Amid these internal battles, a new, covert force began to stir, one that was determined to reverse the tide of reform at any cost. Late one stormy night, as lightning danced across the silvered skyline of Silverbrook, an encrypted message spread quietly through underground networks. The message detailed plans for a series of coordinated actions aimed at undermining the Citizens Oversight Committee. Anonymous sources hinted at clandestine meetings between former high-ranking officials, influential business tycoons, and political operatives whose loyalties lay with the old ways. Their goal was simple yet audacious: to create chaos that would discredit the reform movement and reestablish the power dynamics that had once defined Silverbrook. Rebecca Sinclair, the fearless investigative journalist whose articles had become a clarion call for accountability, was the first to catch wind of these plans. Late one night in her modest downtown office, she reviewed a series of intercepted communications and financial records that suggested a vast network was preparing to flood the city with disinformation and orchestrate acts of intimidation. Her hands trembled as she typed out a new exposé, aware that the story she was about to break could shake the very foundations of Silverbrook's fragile progress. The clash in the public arena. As the days turned into weeks, the undercurrents of tension finally erupted in the public arena. At a major city council meeting held in the grand but aging hall of Silverbrook's administrative center, the air was electric with anticipation. Council members, reform advocates, and representatives of the old guard all gathered to debate the next phase of the city's transformation. The meeting quickly devolved into a battleground of words and ideologies. Heated exchanges punctuated by raised voices and urgent gestures became the norm as each side fought for the narrative of Silverbrook's future. Ava took the floor amidst this turbulent scene, her presence commanding yet compassionate. "We stand at a crossroads," she proclaimed, her voice steady despite the storm of opposition. "This is the moment when we must decide. Will we allow the forces of corruption to pull us back into the shadows, or will we forge ahead, united in our pursuit of justice and accountability?" Her words were met with a mixture of resounding applause and fervent dissent. In the gallery, citizens held their breath, acutely aware that the outcome of this debate could very well define the destiny of their city. The debate reached its crescendo when an unexpected voice joined the fray, a representative from one of the city's largest local businesses, a man with close ties to the old regime. With carefully measured rhetoric, he argued that the rapid pace of reform threatened economic stability and that the new measures were unrealistic in the current climate. His remarks ignited a fierce backlash from reform advocates who countered that long-term prosperity could only be built on a foundation of trust and integrity. The clash of perspectives was raw and unfiltered, a stark reminder that while the promise of a new dawn was bright, the road ahead was fraught with peril. Moments of personal reckoning. In the quiet aftermath of the council meeting, as the echoes of the fierce debate lingered in empty corridors, Ava retreated to a small, secluded office in the Civic Renewal Center. Here, away from the public eye, she allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. Sitting by a window that overlooked the restless streets, she replayed the day's events in her mind. The weight of responsibility, the constant threat of sabotage, and the ever-present possibility of betrayal pressed upon her like an unyielding force. In that solitary space, Ava reflected on the personal sacrifices that had brought her to this point. Every scar, both seen and unseen, spoke of nights spent in fear, of dreams nearly shattered by the relentless machinations of those who profited from injustice. Yet, in that same moment of quiet reflection, she found a renewed sense of determination. The challenges of the present were formidable, but they were also the crucible in which true change would be forged. "We cannot falter now," she whispered to herself. "Every obstacle, every setback, is merely a test of our resolve. We must remain steadfast, for Silverbrook's future depends on it." The turning tide of public sentiment. Simultaneously, across the city, the ordinary citizens of Silverbrook began to assert their voices in new and powerful ways. Community forums, street rallies, and local radio call-in shows became vibrant platforms for discussion and dissent. Stories of personal hardship, courage, and perseverance resonated deeply with audiences. In one such forum held at a local community center, a middle-aged teacher shared how her neighborhood had once been a forgotten backwater, but was now buzzing with the energy of a united populace. "We are not victims," she declared passionately. "We are the architects of our destiny. Our voices, no matter how small, are the building blocks of the future we want to see." These grassroots expressions of unity and resilience began to shift public sentiment in ways that the covert forces of the old guard had not anticipated. The broader community started to see that the fight for justice was not just a political battle but a deeply personal one, a struggle that affected every aspect of life in Silverbrook. The tipping point, the converging pressures of internal discord, external sabotage, and a burgeoning grassroots movement created a critical mass, a tipping point that could no longer be ignored. The city's reform movement was at a crossroads. Every public demonstration, every media report, and every heartfelt conversation contributed to a growing chorus demanding lasting change. The silent networks of corruption, long thought to be unassailable, began to show signs of unraveling under the relentless scrutiny of an awakened citizenry. It was at this moment of heightened tension that a decisive event shook Silverbrook to its core. During a high-profile community rally in the central square, a gathering meant to celebrate the city's progress and reaffirm its commitment to reform, a coordinated act of vandalism targeted several key symbols of the old regime. Statues of former officials, once revered by a faction of the city's elite, were defaced with slogans demanding truth and justice. The act was not only a symbolic repudiation of the past, but also a public declaration that the citizens of Silverbrook were unwilling to let history repeat itself. The vandalism, broadcast live on local television and rapidly spread on social media, ignited a firestorm of reactions. While some condemned the act as unlawful, the majority saw it as the inevitable spark needed to galvanize the movement for change. In a matter of hours, the rally transformed into a massive demonstration. Thousands of people poured into the streets, their voices raised in unison, chanting for accountability and the complete eradication of corruption. What lies ahead? In the midst of this explosive moment, Silverbrook stood at the threshold of a new era. The combined force of determined citizens, brave reformers, and relentless journalists was poised to usher in a transformative wave that could redefine the city's future. Yet, even as the momentum built and hope shone brighter, the battle was far from over. The forces aligned against reform were not easily vanquished, and the road to true, lasting change would require every ounce of courage, unity, and sacrifice. Ava Monroe, watching the surge of unity from the steps of the Civic Renewal Center, felt both a profound sense of pride and an acute awareness of the challenges that still lay ahead. "This is our moment," she declared in a brief, impassioned address broadcast to the rally. "Today, we have shown that the power of truth and the strength of our community can overcome even the deepest-seated corruption. But let us remember, our work is just beginning. We must continue to stand together, vigilant and unwavering, until every corner of Silverbrook reflects the justice and integrity we all deserve." What do you think? As Silverbrook teeters on the brink of transformation, the tipping point has arrived, a moment that promises to reshape its destiny. The city's future now hangs in a delicate balance between the old order and the promise of a reformed society built on transparency, accountability, and the collective will of its people. What is your prediction for Silverbrook's next chapter? How will the city harness this momentum to secure lasting change? Share your thoughts below. In the wake of the explosive events at the Central Rally, Silverbrook began to transform in ways that no one had ever imagined. The vandalism that shattered the old symbols of corruption was only the beginning, a catalyst for a profound reawakening. Now, as the city slowly settled into a new rhythm, every corner of Silverbrook vibrated with a sense of possibility, renewal, and a determination to build a future where justice was not merely an ideal, but a lived reality. Reconstructing the foundations. In the days that followed the massive demonstration, city officials and reform advocates convened in a series of roundtable meetings that became the crucibles of Silverbrook's rebirth. The Citizens Oversight Committee, once seen as a fledgling body, was now fully integrated into the fabric of local governance. Its members, drawn from every segment of the community, from longtime residents who had borne the weight of decades-long injustice to young activists bursting with fresh ideas, worked tirelessly to draft a new charter for transparency and accountability. At the helm of this transformation was Ava Monroe, whose unwavering resolve had inspired not only those who had marched in the streets, but also those who had quietly labored in the corridors of power. Standing before an assembly of community leaders in the renovated City Hall, a building that had once been emblematic of bureaucratic stagnation, Ava laid out a vision for a government that would serve the people rather than its own interests. Today, she declared, we begin to write a new story for Silverbrook, one where our institutions are rebuilt on the pillars of integrity, transparency, and mutual respect. Our past may be marred by corruption, but our future will shine with the light of redemption, healing the wounds of the past. Across the city, efforts were underway to mend the deep social scars left by years of injustice. In neighborhoods where despair had once seemed inescapable, community centers transformed into spaces for dialogue and healing. Local schools partnered with civic organizations to develop curricula that taught not only history and literature, but also the importance of civic duty, empathy, and the power of collective action. Elder residents, who had long been the keepers of Silverbrook's memories, began to share their stories at public gatherings. These narratives, filled with both sorrow and resilience, provided context for the struggles of the past and a roadmap for the future. One such evening, in a modest community hall lit by the gentle glow of lanterns, an old woman named Marjorie recounted how the city had once been a place of hope before it was overtaken by corruption. We must remember, she said, her voice tremulous yet determined, that every dark night is followed by the dawn. Let us honor our past by ensuring that the mistakes we made are not repeated. Instituting structural change. The practical work of reform soon took center stage. Under the guidance of James Ellison and a newly formed team of policy experts, a series of sweeping legislative changes were enacted. These included strict measures to prevent conflicts of interest, comprehensive audits of municipal expenditures, and the establishment of independent bodies to oversee law enforcement practices. The reforms, though not without their detractors, signaled an unequivocal commitment to dismantling the old structures that had long enabled abuse of power. One landmark measure was the creation of an independent review board, with representatives from diverse community sectors. This board was empowered to investigate complaints against police officers and public officials without interference from entrenched bureaucracies. In a poignant public ceremony, the board's inaugural meeting was held in a refurbished civic center. The air was charged with optimism as community members, activists, and reform-minded officials gathered to witness a new chapter in Silverbrook's history. A chapter where the voices of the many would finally drown out the whispers of the corrupt few. Redemption in the hearts of the people. As structural reforms began to take shape, the true transformation of Silverbrook was happening on a personal level. Former police officers, once complicit in a system of corruption, began to come forward with stories of regret and the desire for redemption. Among them was Officer Daniel Reyes, a man whose quiet remorse had long been hidden behind a veneer of indifference. In a moving public statement, Reyes acknowledged his past misdeeds and expressed his commitment to working with the Oversight Committee to rebuild trust between the police and the community. I was once part of a system that betrayed the people, he said, his voice choked with emotion. Today, I vow to be part of the solution, to serve with honor and restore the dignity of our profession. Even the most hardened skeptics of the past found reasons to hope as stories of personal transformation multiplied. Community initiatives flourished, youth mentorship programs, neighborhood beautification projects, and local art festivals became the new markers of progress. These projects were not just about improving physical spaces. They were about rebuilding the bonds between people, healing old wounds, and forging a collective identity that was unburdened by the legacy of corruption. An era of cultural renaissance. The cultural scene in Silverbrook underwent a renaissance. Artists, writers, and musicians seized upon the spirit of change, producing works that captured the city's struggles and aspirations. Murals depicting scenes of rebirth and renewal began to adorn the walls of previously neglected neighborhoods. A local theater group staged a play based on the real-life journey of Ava Monroe, a story of triumph over tyranny, of a single voice that ignited a revolution. These artistic expressions were not mere embellishments. They were a vital part of the healing process, allowing the community to confront its painful past and celebrate its hard-won progress. Rebecca Sinclair, whose investigative reporting had once exposed the darkest corners of Silverbrook's corruption, now found herself heralded as a champion of truth. Her columns, rich with nuance and insight, chronicled the ongoing metamorphosis of the city. In one of her widely read editorials, she wrote, "The story of Silverbrook is not one of defeat, but of redemption. It is a testament to the indomitable spirit of a community that refused to be defined by its past and chose, instead, to forge a future illuminated by justice and hope." Forging a new order. In the corridors of power, the remnants of the old guard gradually found themselves sidelined. Figures like Detective Marcus Reed and Sergeant Adrian Moore, whose names had once been synonymous with corruption, were now facing legal battles and public scrutiny. Judge Philip Garner, whose compromised decisions had once tainted the judicial process, was subject to a rigorous review that resulted in a sweeping overhaul of the local court system. With new leadership in place, the judiciary began to reflect the values of fairness and impartiality that had been long denied to the citizens of Silverbrook. At the heart of this new order was a commitment to participatory governance. Regular town hall meetings, open forums, and community advisory councils became standard practice, ensuring that every decision was made with the input of those it most affected. In these gatherings, the diverse voices of Silverbrook, young and old, rich and poor, hopeful and disillusioned, contributed to a collective vision of what the city could become. It was a radical departure from the top-down management of the past, a true democratization of power that resonated deeply with a populace eager for change. The promise of tomorrow. As Silverbrook stepped firmly into this new era, there was an unmistakable air of cautious optimism. The journey had been long and fraught with setbacks, but the relentless pursuit of justice had begun to bear fruit. Ava Monroe, now more than a symbol of resistance, emerged as a visionary leader whose influence extended far beyond the boundaries of her own story. In her speeches and interviews, she emphasized that the road ahead would require constant vigilance. Reform is not a destination, it is a continuous journey, she reminded her supporters. We must never allow complacency to creep in. Every day, we must stand guard against the forces that seek to undermine our hard-won progress. In this era of renewal, every challenge was met with a collective determination to overcome it. The people of Silverbrook had learned that true change required both the strength of individual convictions and the power of unified action. The city's future was no longer a passive outcome dictated by the whims of corrupt elites. It was an active, ongoing creation, forged by the hands of its citizens, each contributing their own unique thread to the tapestry of a reimagined society. What lies beyond the horizon? As dusk settled over a transformed Silverbrook, the city shimmered with the promise of a brighter future. The streets that once echoed with the sounds of despair now hummed with the vibrant symphony of renewal, a testament to what can be achieved when people come together in pursuit of a common dream. The past, with all its shadows and scars, had been acknowledged and honored, but it no longer defined the present. Instead, every step forward was a tribute to the resilience of the human spirit and a beacon of hope for generations to come. Today, Silverbrook stands as a living example of redemption, a city reborn from the ashes of corruption, determined to write a new chapter in its history. And as the sun rose on this new day, one question remained at the heart of every citizen's mind. What new possibilities await in this brave, uncharted future? What dreams do you envision for a reformed Silverbrook? How can we, as a community, ensure that this new order endures and grows stronger? Share your vision below. As we reach the end of this journey, remember that every act of courage, every voice raised against injustice, brings us closer to a world where love and integrity prevail. Our hearts beat with gratitude for the brave souls who stand up for what is right, and our spirits are warmed by the collective hope that unites us. In a time of uncertainty, let compassion guide us and kindness remind us that we are all part of one community, a community where every gesture of love can spark the light of change. Thank you for being a vital part of this story. Your support and belief in a better tomorrow mean more than words can express. Let's continue to stand together, inspire one another, and build a future filled with hope, justice, and unconditional love. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories of hope and transformation.